The late Pope Francis' cause of death has been confirmed as a stroke followed by irreversible heart failure.
For the first time in years, Russian President Vladimir Putin has expressed a willingness to hold direct talks with Ukraine.
Trump's attacks on Fed Chair Powell fueled concerns over central bank independence, triggering market sell-offs. The dollar hit a 3-year low, gold reached a record high, and treasury yields jumped.
The late Pope Francis' cause of death was confirmed by the Vatican on Monday evening as a stroke followed by irreversible heart failure. His passing was announced earlier in the morning, with bells tolling in Catholic churches from Latin America to Asia and across Rome as the news spread around the world. The 88-year-old pontiff's health had been struggling in recent weeks. In February, he was admitted to the Gemelli Hospital in Rome, where he spent 38 days battling a respiratory crisis that developed into double pneumonia. It wasn't his first encounter with pulmonary issues. Francis suffered from chronic lung disease his entire life, even having part of his lung removed as a young man. He was released from hospital and returned to the Vatican in late March, where he resumed his papal role with lighter duties. Francis made his last public appearance on Easter Sunday to bless thousands of people in St. Peter's Square. The Vatican says the public will likely be able to begin paying their final respects to Pope Francis starting Wednesday in St. Peter's Basilica. In a change ordered by Francis, the Pope's body will no longer be placed on an elevated bier, but rather the wooden coffin will be placed facing the pews. However, the date of the funeral for Pope Francis, who asked to be buried in the ground at St. Mary Major Basilica, has not yet been decided. A sede vacante or vacancy has now begun in the Vatican, marked by the red ribbon and wax ceiling of the late Pope's formal apartment.
The death of a pope sets in motion a series of carefully orchestrated rites and rituals surrounding the pontiff's burial and electing a successor, a process known as the conclave. Following the Pope's death, a 9-day mourning period follows. During this period, the College of Cardinals assembles in the Vatican, where they will be locked in the Sistine Chapel around 15 days after the Pope's death, bound by secrecy as they elect a new Pope. Immediately after an initial mass, the cardinals cast their first ballots. If no Pope is elected, the ballots are burned and the process is repeated 4 times a day until one candidate receives a 2/3 majority. Black smoke signals an inconclusive vote. White smoke announces to the world that a new pope has been chosen.
Habemus Papam.
The new pope then emerges and gives his first blessing.
Fratelli e sorelle, buonasera.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has expressed for the first time in years a willingness to hold direct talks with Ukraine. This marks potential diplomatic movement as pressure mounts from the US for both sides to reach a ceasefire deal. Speaking to Russian state media, Putin claimed Moscow was open to discussing the possibility of halting strikes on civilian infrastructure with Kyiv. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has also signaled readiness for dialogue, proposing a 30-day ceasefire to end attacks on civilians, though Russia has yet to accept the offer. As talks intensify, the US has warned that it could withdraw its support for peace efforts if there's no visible progress. With negotiations set to continue in London this week, the coming days could determine whether renewed diplomacy finally leads to peace.
Harvard University has filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration in an effort to block a federal freeze on more than $2.2 billion in grant funding. The legal action follows the university's refusal to comply with a series of demands issued by the administration aimed at curbing campus activism. Earlier this month, the White House sent a letter to Harvard outlining proposed reforms that included changes to university leadership and admissions policies and an audit of its diversity initiatives. The administration also urged the university to revoke recognition of several student organizations.
Why is it okay?
After Harvard President Alan Garber publicly rejected the demands, the federal government responded by freezing the university's grant funding. The university claims the government's demands are not only a threat to the Ivy League school itself, but to the autonomy that the Supreme Court has long granted American universities.
President Trump intensified his attacks on Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell on Monday, demanding immediate rate cuts and calling him a major loser. Trump warned of an economic slowdown and accused Powell of past political bias in a social media post. The attacks heightened fears over the Fed's independence, triggering sharp sell-offs across U.S. markets on Monday. Stock indices fell over 2% and the dollar index hit a 3-year low, while the euro and Swiss franc surged. U.S. Treasury yields jumped, with the 10-year yield reaching 4.4%. Gold prices hit new record highs near $3,500 an ounce, fueled by dollar worries and risk aversion. The possibility of dismissing Powell by the Trump administration has been acknowledged by President's advisor Kevin Hassett on Monday. Analysts warn that firing the Fed chair could unleash extreme market volatility and permanently damage the dollar's global status. Powell struck a cautious tone last week, signaling no rush to cut rates and warning about inflation driven by tariffs. While appointed by the president, Fed chairs have legally protected independence and can usually only be fired for cause.
With survey participants,
Powell's term ends in May 2026, but the current pressure raises significant concerns over financial stability.
appear to remain well anchored as well.
Instagram is now using AI to spot underage users who enter false birth dates when signing up. The app will proactively flag accounts it suspects belong to children, reclassifying them as teen accounts with stricter privacy controls. Teen profiles are private by default, limit who can message them, and restrict sensitive content, like violent videos or cosmetic surgery ads. The changes come as pressure builds on social media companies to better protect children online.
In the smart computer, there is some AI algorithms. We analyze the data, then we find the key objects. For example, I'm interested in the chair. It tells me where the chair is. And then I move to the chair. I make one step, then actually the information change because my position gets changed. Also the update itself, update the new information to tell where the chair is. In this way, step by step, then I can approach the target safely.
Developing smart glasses with a view to feeding information to a blind person is a real step forward in terms of both navigation and I guess independence. You know, many visually impaired people want to remain as independent as possible. And yes, you can use a guide dog, you can use a cane, but ultimately the ability of a camera mounted on glasses to feed information to you via both your ears and by haptic feedback is just a massive step forward.
A film portraying the activism of residents of Covas de Barroso, a small town in the north of Portugal, will arrive in cinemas on the 24th of April after the world premiere at the Cannes Directors Fortnight. Savannah and the Mountain by director Paulo Carneiro is a documentary fiction depicting a history of resistance in the form of a musical western.
As pessoas de Covas do Barroso eram mal representadas por documentário, porque era preciso pô-las em ação, era preciso tirar a luta do escritório, não é? Dos e-mails, dos papers científicos que têm de ser lidos e relidos e analisados por pessoas especialistas e pôr em prática a luta, mostrar a luta na sua prática.
The film gives a voice to a rural community fighting for its land after discovering that British lithium extraction giant Savannah Resources is planning to build Europe's largest open pit mine just a few meters from their homes.
Nós vivemos numa das regiões mais isoladas do país, mas que em 2017, 2018, salvo erro, fomos considerados Património Agrícola Mundial pela maneira como vivemos, como trabalhamos a terra, como nos correlacionamos com a natureza. E quando vemos um projeto destes à nossa porta, em que põe em perigo tudo que temos, a maneira como vivemos, corrermos o risco de ter que abandonar o nosso lugar, o filme retrata exatamente isso.
The struggle is amplified by the intervention of Carlos Libos's soundtracks and the authenticity that the inhabitants of Covas do Barroso bring to the film. The expectation, in the eyes of director Paulo Carneiro, is that it will fill cinemas and achieve success nationwide, not just in the major cities.